All right, good evening. We are here tonight to discuss the school fiscal year 16 budget, and we are grateful that many of the school committee and its administration have shown up tonight to present their budget to us. So I'd like to welcome Superintendent of Schools Mary Gormley and Assistant Super Janet Sheehan, and School Committee Chair Leroy Walker, and Assistant Head for Business. Is that what your official title is? Assistant Superintendent. Official Assistant Superintendent, sorry, thank you. Glenn Pavlicek, and School Committee members Mary Kelly and Mike Zullis, and Senator Brian Joyce has decided to drop in with us too. I think there's a seat at the table for you, Senator. At any rate, so this is the meeting wherein we are presented the initial take on the school budget and try and ask some questions. I will say that the school is ahead of schedule this year. They have presented us with their full detailed budgets now rather than in January, and that's great. I confess I did not have much of a chance to read it today. We got them yesterday, but this is great. It will give us a lot more time to digest this along with the initial presentation tonight. And I think I will turn the meeting over to Glenn or to Leroy, whoever would like to address us first.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to brief you on the 15-16 budget. As Ted alluded to, one of the things, many of us have been on your side of the table for quite a number of years, so one of our objectives was to get you the information as early as possible. It is a detailed budget, and what we will do tonight is talk about what the key priorities are that we've identified. For some of you, you're familiar with our advancement initiatives, which is in its third year, but we've done a good job here, I think, of providing those of you who aren't familiar a good foundation for what that's about and why those priorities are important. We will also spend some time on special education, which is one of the key budget drivers, and then finally go through the budget presentation itself. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Gormley, and certainly at any point if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer those questions.
Good evening. So we sent you a presentation. We're going to go over this PowerPoint with you. And for those in the viewing audience and some warrant committee members, you have seen parts of this presentation. But for you tonight, we have put it together. Stop me at any time if you have a question, because we think that the context of the advancement budget, that the Finance Subcommittee, the School Committee, I tell the public, the Warrant Committee, and the town listened to and supported is worth putting in the context tonight. And what I say when I go out to the staff, and we're going to go out to every PTO, is that we meet with the leadership team of principals, special ed director, and technology director. We develop this budget, and then every Tuesday morning, we meet with the Finance Subcommittee. Mary Kelly is the chair, Leroy Walker and Mike Zullis, the three of us from the schools. We bring different individuals in, and if it's this budget, editing it, the 5-year projections, dealing with the selectmen. We're meeting tomorrow afternoon with the leadership team to meet your requirement. If we weren't fully funded, what would that mean to the school? That will go to the Finance Subcommittee. So I think it's important in the context that the group we bring here is a team, and to the point that we would have sent this book out in this presentation, and the Finance Subcommittee and the School Committee get a chance to edit and comment on it. So we're going to begin with, in our presentation, the vision of the Milton Public Schools is to build a system and strengthen a dynamic community that challenges students to thrive and achieve. And so what happened 3 years ago, let me put this in the context, the Finance Subcommittee and the School Committee said, what do you need to move the system ahead? To move the Milton Public Schools ahead, what do you need? So we met with our 21, our principals, our assistant principals, our curriculum coordinators, and we brainstormed in a room that looks like this. And based on the student data, MCAS data, internal assessments, SATs, we brainstormed across the whole room, from the arts to eliminating fees. And based on the student data, we decided that early literacy, all students reading at proficient or advanced at the end of grade 3. So now that was 2 years ago that I'm putting this in the context, established that as one of the criteria. Since then, a month doesn't go by if it's not a national magazine or a national newspaper, the Patriot Ledger or the Globe, you'll see all of the research. The floodgate, the bellwether, is children who are able to read at grade level at the end of grade 3. That's really, in our kind of world, algebra is a differentiating. Children who take algebra at grade 8, calculus is a determining factor for careers, being able to read at the end of grade 3. Secondly, and we had data that we're going to share with you, that we had issues around. We didn't have 100%, and you'll see that data on the screen. We then have identified achievement gaps. And so we looked at MCAS data, and we identified the students that weren't achieving in the district. And we also had issues around science achievement student data. And at the middle school, Dr. Karen Spalding, who her discipline is science by trade, she said, we didn't have the science. How can they achieve in science if we didn't have the curriculum in the hands of the students? So of all the ideas, from eliminating fees to enhancing the arts to the comprehensive high school, we centered in on those 3 initiatives. So next slide. Again, emphasizing early literacy, pre-K through 3, closing those identified achievement gaps, and advancing science and STEM. STEM, 2 years ago, you might not have been familiar with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math careers. Now, the Milton Foundation for Education, their theme this year is STEAM. Anyone not know what STEAM is? They added the arts. So this is a national movement.
Thank you.
Again, a national, the teacher in me. So again, the theme, and this was all based on student data. We had issues around these 3 areas. Again, this slide, it's online, but we really put this presentation together for just you. We traced the commitment that you've given in the FY14 and this current FY15 year. We're going to trace in 14 the $515,000, and in 13 to 14, and then in 14 and 15, our current year, $538,000. We're going to trace that. We're going to show you how we're assessing the impact of those important funds. We're going to show you the initiatives, again, that came from the bottom up, but the school committee and finance committee agreed upon them. And again, the level of success will really drive the system in these 3 areas. So first, emphasizing early literacy. We based all of this on student data, but the research that supports it. And this professor at Harvard, Nani, I believe it's Lesso, she's referred to it, all of the articles. And again, I'm not going to read to you, but this reading, by the end of grade 3, the research proves tracing following students who can't read, who aren't at, the MCAS begins at grade 3, at proficient and advanced. It's really a floodgate to developing achievement further on in a child's career. So the next slide. So if you look, I just want to show you this data. So if you see in 2012, when I told you that's not going to work, when we all were together, 29% of grade 3 students scored below proficient on their MCAS. So that was the year that we decided, the goal is 100% of the children reading at proficient advanced, and we had 29%. So then the next year, 28% of the third graders, again, we identified the right area. What if we had seen that we only had 5% of the children not reading at proficient and advanced? We knew that this is where we had to put the text, materials, and supplies, extended day, and personnel, and then 31% this past spring. But as we go through this presentation, we're going to show you that we really centered on grades 1 and 2, and so we're looking for results is this coming May. Now we're going to test grade 3. They've had the reading specialists, they've had the assessments, they've had the materials. So again, that's an identified need. The goal everywhere, all of the research, all of the press, all of the editorials is reading at proficient and advanced at the end of grade 3. So in 14, this is bringing it back to you who are on the committee, to you who have children in the district, citizens, residents who watch this. We, again, brainstormed. We meet with Finance Subcommittee. In the first year, in school districts, what we've done over the years is prioritize the classroom teacher. And these reading specialists, I say to people, they should call their relatives and friends in other districts with elementary school children. These reading specialists targets 1, 2, and 3, children in grades 1, 2, and 3. And by giving them the support, going into the classroom, working with the classroom teacher, there are 2 goals. One is to improve the achievement, help these children break the code at the end of grade 3. But the other, and today Janet Sheehan and I were out in the schools for 6 hours meeting with the principals, looking at this data. It should, within the next 2 years, have an impact on helping students get over grades 1 and 2 and not having to be identified in the special ed world. And so before we had the reading specialists, and if you had issues around learning, you may have been identified for an individual plan in the world of special education, and again, get services through special education. But these reading specialists can move in and out of classrooms, and all of a sudden, Glenn breaks the code, but we have to stay with the reading specialist. But as I say to people, being an elementary person, nowhere is it written that you break the code on the first day of first grade or the last day of second grade. All students break that code at different times in the first, second, and third grade. So the first year, with the support of the Warrant Committee and the town meeting, we put 2 reading specialists and a digital education specialist. Again, looking towards the PARCC testing. This implementation of PARCC testing this year and next year is really bringing school districts to their knees. What we have done is 2 years ago, under the leadership of the school committee with the MFE, the Milton Foundation for Education, and the Copelands partnered, and I go to meetings of superintendents who say we don't have the infrastructure to be able to even jump into this PARCC. MCAS is turning into a digitally administered test starting at grades 3. And so we're going into that. Last year we piloted. We're going to go into it this year. And so we needed somebody at the elementary level, again, 2,000 children, to work with the teachers and work with the students to give them the skills to be able to take the test online. This is a new world of assessment and testing, and everybody is used to MCAS now. But over the next 2 years, we're rolling in to a test that's taken totally 3 through 9, and in 10th grade, English and math and biology will all be taken online. And so we needed a digital one person to service 4 elementary schools. In the instructional support, these formative assessments, again, we didn't have these assessments in the Milton Public Schools. The history was when we put a curriculum in, we'd put it 1 year. Any of you who have children in the district know that. We needed these formative assessments, and we needed to put them in so that Member Kelly would always say, you know, we can't wait till the MCAS comes out to know how the children are doing. So now 3 times a year, these formative assessments are given. We actually trace children, how many levels are they advancing, and if they're not advancing, are they meeting with the reading specialist? Are their needs beyond that of a reading specialist? Reading curriculum materials, we put a new program in grades 1 and 2, rather than having to put that out over 3 years, the implementation, this advancement budget permitted us to put those materials in grades 1 and 2, and then the professional development that was associated. This is when we were talking about those one-time funds, being able to work with the teachers in grades 1 and 2 around the new curriculum. Teachers, they call it blitzing. They trained all of the teachers and the reading specialist, and when they go in and give these reading assessments, every person that's not in front of children, they're trained to go into the classroom, and it's a one-on-one assessment given 3 times a year. So I'm not waiting for the end of the year to find out, are you advancing 2 reading levels, 4 reading levels? So in FY14, in the area of early literacy, these were the purchases. The preliminary results, at the end of this first year, grade 1 English students improved from 68% were on or above benchmark to 86% on or above benchmark. Now we're aligning these internal assessments, and again, these children now in grade 2, now they're in grade 3. We're using this student data in 1 and 2, and again, we're waiting for these particular children to take their 3rd grade MCAS. And at grade 2, the grade 2 students improved from 81% to 86% over the year on these internal assessments that we were able to administer. And again, why did they improve? The reading specialists, the assessments enabled us to gather this data, and the new curriculum materials. Again, all purchased in the first year of the advancement. This particular year, we came back to you last year, and we had targeted these reading specialists at grades 1 and 2. We asked for an additional reading specialist in grades 3. So 1 reading specialist, there are 320, stop me at any time. Mike?
Yeah, I just want, do we have these numbers for fiscal year 15? You would think that if the kids improved in grade 1 in fiscal year 14, did they score well also in grade 2 in fiscal year 15?
Yeah, this is going to come up now.
Oh. I
Did
was
we-
looking
did
for,
we do
okay.
that?
We're still in 15.
So we haven't done that.
No.
So, yeah, the testing in fiscal year 15 is going to happen in the spring,
Yeah.
and then the formative
I'll wait
assessments.
patiently
Right.
until
Will-
those-
That's all right. You ask a question anytime you want.
I have a question about the previous slide. Do you happen to know what the typical rate of improvement was in previous years before you started this program?
Well, that's really the essence of the whole purchase, and you weren't with us in 14. We didn't have the assessments. So these are purchased, you have to purchase these assessments, and so we weren't giving these assessments before. So now we're giving these assessments. You had to purchase them, train the teachers on how to give them. So we weren't giving them. We weren't tracking this kind of data. But now we're able to track that data, and so I would give you an analogy. Janet and I, and John Phelan before Janet, we actually sit down with the principal, and we look at the first grade, and we look at the percentage of children. How many have gone up 2 grade level? How many, not grade levels, levels on these assessments? How many have gone up 4? You know, I remember sitting at the Glover and saying, why is that child gone from A to A minus? You know, is that child going to be cored? Is that child going to have an individual plan? Again, I always say it gives new significance to no child being left behind. We look at every single child. You know, we went into schools today and we looked at the math assessments. So we're actually looking at, you know, what are you doing for the children that are at the top of the spectrum, and what are these children? We actually look at the children's names, what subgroups. So I said today to the principals, they're implementing, they're using this advancement money. I said, when we come back in January, every low-income child, you have to show me every child that's identified as low-income and what kind of support are they getting, because that's a subgroup that's underperforming. I want to see every African-American child and what support are they getting. Again, some of those children are at the higher end of the spectrum, but those are groups that are identified as not making the progress on MCAS to make the target that the state has set up for us. And so that's what's really enabled us to put these extra supports. So I'm not just saying, I think the 3 of you might benefit. Again, we have the data to back it up.
Phil?
What is benchmark?
Benchmark, a grade level.
When you say it's 86% on or above benchmark in June of 2014, benchmark means that grade level?
Grade level.
Okay.
And so now we're asking, again, what's very important is when these children take the MCAS, have we established the right benchmark that now we're going to see that in their MCAS scores? That's what we did in the math today. When we were looking at the math assessments, we said, is the test difficult enough that it's going to be an indicator of MCAS? And so are we targeting, are we the right children to be going on Saturday mornings or after school or seeing the reading teacher? So we have to make sure they closely correlate.
Are your 2 reading specialists spread amongst 4 elementary schools?
That's a great question. We target 1 reading teacher in English to target the Tucker. We pair the Tucker and the Glover, and then we pair the Collycott and Cunningham. So you're not wasting time driving across town. And, in the elementary schools, it ranges from, some elementary schools have 1 reading specialist, but we feel that this is the best model. And then we have a French-speaking reading specialist who services the 2 partner schools and then the Collycott Cunningham School. And then the 3rd grade teacher really moves across the district. A different set of skills once they get to 3rd grade and a higher sense of urgency. And
So, Mary,
of course.
if you don't mind, I just wanted to clarify what inspired you to go after early literacy in the beginning. I believe it was your results on the 3rd grade level MCAS. Now, we don't know, just to follow up on Lee Michael's question, we don't know how quickly kids may have moved from, say, 68% to 86% in those assessments because we weren't performing those assessments before. So we don't have that as a comparison, so it's hard to measure the efficacy of the new strategy with those assessments. We're waiting for the 3rd graders to take the MCAS to measure that effect cumulatively.
And so Ted followed this last
right?
year. It's right. We could have taken our reading specialists and put them at grade 3 for the last year and the year before, and then seen the results of the MCAS. But that wouldn't been educationally or morally or any other reason correct. So we sent it in 1 and 2, and now those children are in grade 3, and they'll be taking the MCAS. So now the materials are in place, the assessments are in place, the reading specialists are in place. So this is, last year the school committee, finance subcommittee, the public understood that those children who had benefited from those materials, had benefited from those reading teachers, this is the year that they're taking the MCAS, at the end of this year. And they'll be taking POC, ironically.
And there are corollary benefits along the way. If you catch somebody with a problem earlier on, based on your internal assessments, then you may save a large sped bill later. So
Absolutely.
anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, at any time. So now FY15, the year we're in, Mike, we're in 15. So the new person, so we get, it happens to all of us, Mike.
I was trying to answer a question I had by looking in the book without opening my mouth.
I had one of those smart kids going in. So in the new personnel, we said the reading specialist at grade 3, and then through the research and through our own work, we could tell that we needed somebody to work with parents. I analogize it to a triangle. We're working hard, the child's working hard if you're not engaging the family. And we have more and more groups looking at what's the attendance at school events and what's the involvement of the families, and everybody who understands the educational process understands that the family is involved and the family is supportive, and the family goes to parent-teacher conferences and PTOs and participates in the school. So we have hired 1 parent outreach person. Janet Sheehan did a phenomenal job, a tremendous amount of interviewing, and this parent outreach person, we'll get to this later, we put a preschool in. This person went actually to the homes, liaisoned with the parents, making those connections with preschool and kindergarten parents who don't feel connected to the school, identifying why they don't feel connected, bringing them into the school. So this was part of the purchase. That was a new hire this year. And then instructional support. We talked to you about the early literacy, the nonfiction leveled readers. Again, when we went to school, everyone had the same reader. The research proves that children who are excelling have to be challenged at readers at their level, where I might need a reader that's, if we're in the third grade, that's a second or third grade reader, but you can use a fourth or fifth grade reader. So these nonfiction leveled readers were huge. And the pre-K materials, so what we did was we've put in a preschool program, a district-wide preschool program, and it's housed at the Tucker School, the one place that we had a location. And what it's running, it's part-time, and it's running for 3 10-week sessions. And we've identified children through this outreach coordinator and the principals that aren't in a formal preschool. And so, again, the correlation to the achievement of children who are in formal preschools to children who aren't in any kind of preschool or having any academic experience before school is huge. So we actually, the prior Tucker principal, started to bring pre-kindergartners to kindergarten to summer school. And we could even, the kindergarten teachers, we surveyed them, they could tell the difference of the children who had been in the summer program. They had a jump start when they came to kindergarten. Every one of those days is important. And then the professional development associated with putting this Readers Writers Workshop in. So those are really the emphasis of what's going on this year in the area of early literacy. Now we're looking ahead to this next year. Mike, 15, 16. 15, 16.
Write that down.
15, 16. And so what, again, working with the leadership team, working with the school committee and the finance subcommittee, to Ted's point, this early literacy, and anyone who's followed the governor, the president, all of the research about preschool and the impact of bringing children in before kindergarten and giving them those pre-reading skills that really give them the jump start. So we're looking to extend that part-time preschool pilot to a full program, 5 mornings a week and then 5 afternoons a week, district-wide. And again, this outreach and the existing staff, we're identifying children that aren't in any kind of preschool. They're just staying at home, not, really sometimes not even with their parents, in a situation that they're not having any kind of pre-reading experience. And then in the instructional supplies, I apologize for the print on this, we'll fix it the next time. Again, we have set up the program, so we felt that the preschool team looked at a $5,000 ask in the instructional support to put that program in full time. Now there's $20,000 townwide program for third graders. It's interesting that for those of you who don't know, the Tucker, based on the identified families that identify as free and reduced, is a Title I school. And so it's the only school in Milton that's a Title I school. So they get federal funding. And so we've been able to implement some of these programs, and through the principals and the support people really test how effective these programs are. And at grades 1 and 2, it's a certain kind of skill, and then in our world, it says you learn to read, and then at grade 3, you use your reading skills to learn. And so what they've done at the Tucker, and we're asking for next year, and the Tucker, the second week of school had this program in place. They've identified 30 students at risk based on this internal assessment, and they bring them in every Saturday morning. And they've done such work with this, and we want to replicate it district-wide, is that you don't sign up for the whole year to go every Saturday morning. What they've done it is in 10-week increments. So you go 10 weeks, and then you get through the holidays, and then the beginning of January, you'll do another 10-week stretch on Saturday mornings, and they actually come, and they're taught in small groups, English and math. And so, again, they could identify and they could use the internal assessments and tell the success that that brought about. In the area of professional development, $50,000, again, training all of our teachers on these early literacy materials, skills, and going in and training the teachers on this third year using the Readers Writers Workshop. Again, we've identified this as really, other than new teachers in our K1, 2, and 3, this will really be, Glenn will speak to this, a one-time funding. Once we get all of our teachers trained, new teachers could be the teacher trainer model. Once we have all the teachers trained, then we can take our own teachers and they can train any new teachers. But to go through all of the training, to have all of the teachers trained, and then $20,000 will finish the purchase of the leveled readers. Again, these leveled readers, our text materials and supplies line would have never provided for us to put these materials in the hands of the teachers, and we've really partnered with the Milton Foundation for Education on these. The PTOs have purchased these materials. Anyone in the schools and the PTOs are familiar with these leveled readers and the necessity for these materials. So the metrics is, on this early literacy, we're using these formative assessments 3-4 times a year. And at the kindergarten, they're really doing even more excessive assessments. And we're looking at this 2015 MCAS will really start to be the assessment that we use. This will be the first cohort that would have benefited from the materials, the assessments, and the staff. And then the anticipated outcomes, you can all do that with me. All students reading at proficient and advanced at the end of grade 3. And MCAS gives you an actual number target. And so my evaluation with the school committee, every one of the subgroups, we have a target number that we have to achieve. If it's students in ELE, every school, every group, children with special needs, children identified as not speaking English, children low income, children in special education, the regular population, all white children, the state establishes a number, actual number that we have to hit, and that's why our schools will either be level 1 or level 2. But again, we're competing at the state level. So that's the early literacy. That gives you the context of the first year, the second year that we're in, and what we're asking for next year, and how we're evaluating the impact of these dollars that are being funded in the advancement budget. So Janet Sheehan was going to pick up the proficiency gap, closing the proficiency gaps or the achievement gaps.
Thank you. So we have identified the proficiency gaps as a result of our MCAS data. And we have a considerable amount of information that comes from these high-stakes tests and identifies all of the subgroups, which Superintendent Gormley just referred to, gives us information about those and for the overall population, overall student population. So we begin with the research to support the importance of closing the proficiency gaps. You see here, experience tells us that there are consistent contributing factors that combine to produce underperformance. And these are lagging reading skills in the early grades. The research says that these deficiencies generate a disadvantage from which many never recover. We understand that children who do not have enough time in school or those children who have begun their foundational skills without the background of some of the other children are not able to catch up without some kind of extended day learning opportunities. We also lack of effective, analysis of data. And of course, now we have the assessment tools that will allow us to analyze the data. And finally, we have, finally we have differences in educator effectiveness, and that's where our professional development proposals come in. So at the elementary level, we have identified the following needs. We have found that proficiency gaps exist between what we call our high needs subgroup and non-high needs students in both English language arts and math. So that high needs subgroup is identified as students grouped together, students who have disabilities, students identified as low income, and students who are what we call English language learners. So all of those students together form a group known as the high needs subgroup. We've also identified needs between our African American Black students and Hispanic and Latino students, both again in ELA and math, compared to our Asian and white student population.
All based on our MCAS scores.
Additional needs identified at the middle and high school levels are between all subgroups. So all subgroups that we have named thus far. Additionally, we did name Asian white, and there is our non-Hispanic subgroup, multiracial subgroup. So again, we've broken down our needs according to new positions and instructional support. In our FY14 budget, we did not, under our proficiency gap advancement initiative, we did not request any new positions, but under instructional support, we had requested programs and instructional materials to support our extended day and extended year learning opportunities, and again, for students not meeting the benchmarks, students not meeting those performance levels that would indicate that they are meeting the standards. We purchased software for our elementary students so that we could have ongoing assessment tools. It would also allow us to further collect data and analyze that data so that teachers can inform their instruction. We also purchased student assessments referred to previously by Superintendent Gormley, and these were implemented in English language arts. So the preliminary results after our first year of implementing the advancement initiatives, we had district-wide, we found that the gaps in ELA and in science, technology, and engineering between our African American Black students and white students decreased. So in that year, we did see a decrease. We saw improvement. At the middle school, the number of students, again in our high needs subgroup, they scored, they improved by, increased by 11%, the number of students in the advanced and proficient categories. And at the high school level, 96% of our students scored at the advanced proficient level in ELA, 92% in math, and 88% of students in science. Yes?
Are these proficiency scores still based on MCAS results?
Yes, they are.
And if I might, so now we're going into POC, and the school committee had us do a tremendous amount of research, and we have a Milton resident, Dr. Laura Dwyer from Boston College, and she knows the individual. So they have told us in writing that they're calibrating these POC scores so that we can, the school committee was concerned in this third year, will the POC give the same indicator as the MCAS? And they have Desi said absolutely. They're working on a form, I can't even say the word. What is it, Glenn?
It's just a formula to cross it over.
And so they're looking to that because school districts are making these kind of commitments and they're using MCAS. And now this is an important year for us to then change the test. But they've assured us that they're going to be able to use the same data.
So the tests are going to be slightly different when they go over digital.
A different vehicle taking it. But again, this Laura O'Dwyer explained to us in a different setting that she knows the team that they're working on, and they have to. They've made an investment in MCAS. They can't leave those scores and not assure school districts across the state that they're calibrating those so that we can use them and check that we're making the progress.
Okay, Phil and then Kevin.
How much was the decrease in bullet point 1? And how many students are there in the high needs subgroup in bullet point 2?
I don't have those figures, but I'll send them to everybody tomorrow.
Okay.
So your two questions again on that?
How much was the decrease? in point one, how many students are in the high needs subgroup that increased by 11% in point two?
Good, we'll send it, we'll email both of those to you tomorrow.
Okay, so Paul is, sorry, let me just get something in here, Kevin. Paul is the subcommittee head for schools, so maybe you could just send everything to Paul and he'll make sure everybody gets it. That'd be great. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, I'm a little confused. We only have data on 2 years of this, right?
Oh, no, we have data since we've started giving MCAS, but we're talking about the last 2 years of the advancement. You know, so when I said to you that we identified early literacy, we've had an issue. We just gave you the last 3 years, but we looked at the data for the last 10 years.
So if I asked you, can you assure me that the achievement gap that we've closed in the first 3 years is maintained at the high school level, widens, or decreases even more? Do you know that?
Yes, well, first of all, we haven't closed any. We're narrowing the proficiency gaps. We're working towards narrowing the proficiency gaps. And what we've seen, again, with this advancement, is that when you make those, you put the materials, you purchase the materials, you give the teachers the training, and you identify students who need extra time, that though we're narrowing the gap, you continue, that progress continues.
All right, so it doesn't reappear at the secondary level?
No.
Okay. And the
Well,
other-
again, you know what here's, again, I can't say, as I've often said, if I could guarantee that, we'd all be in Washington or New York City, but if we put the correct curriculum in the hands and the materials, and we give the teachers the training, and my analogy is that we live in a community that we get a lot of new children into the Milton Public Schools. And so I often analogize, Glenn and I might be of equal intelligence. In math, he's smarter than I am. But I often say that if I move into the district and I can't catch up with Glenn in the math class, but if you backskill if you bring me in on Saturday mornings, I can't do the multiplication unless I know the addition and subtraction. And so for some children, it takes longer. There are new children into the district. And so what we've done with this targeted time is we've taken these children and we've backfilled the skills they don't have. Or some children just need more time. I just need more time, and I can achieve as Glenn does, but I just need more time with that foundation. And so when you put, again, all of the research, that's why the research for these 3 areas is important. We targeted people, we targeted the correct materials, and we targeted the time.
The other question I had was, PARC is an acronym for something?
Yes.
Is that correct? Do you know what it is?
It's Partnership for the Readiness and Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness in College, for College and Careers.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Mary, you had something to add?
Just with our data specialists, we should be able to take any students in subgroups and basically follow them throughout. We don't have it in place yet, but that's something we should do just as part of the way we evaluate things in the subgroups. So I think what you're getting to is needed just as part of the data that we view on a year.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
But you know what, thinking about your question, we could just stay with you and forget the rest. But my experience is when a child achieves, or a child on MCAS reaches that advanced and proficient, they're going to continue at advanced proficient. That's a really good question, Mr. Sorgi. So when you've achieved at the 4th grade, you're really going to see at the 7th and the 9th and the 10th grade that proficient and advanced.
Good. Thank you.
He was a teacher by
And the ones
trade.
who aren't just never make it. So that's what the data says. The ones that aren't there at 3rd grade, they just never
Well,
catch up.
I don't want to be fatalistic about
Right.
that, but and I'm an elementary school person, and so it's important. By the end of 3rd grade is really important, because then at 4th grade, at 1 and 2, it's a very different setting, and at grade 3. And at 4, you know from your own children, they're learning material. They're not learning to read anymore. So you have to have those reading and skills at the end of third grade. You have to be able to read the material. Or you have to have a different program. So they're not, in the fourth grade and fifth grade where children are excelling, they're not teaching reading skills. Those children are reading and they're learning the text.
I think we do have some data that you might find interesting, and I asked a question at a school committee meeting, which was related. The answer to the question about how that applies to the advancement initiatives is one that will take some time to answer because the program is fairly young. But the question that I asked was, what's the difference in performance between students who have spent their entire school careers in Milton versus students that we might that might enter the system at the middle school or high school level? And we did generate some performance data on that, and as you might expect or might hope, the students who have spent their full school careers here do perform better or are performing better in terms of MCAS. So we'll send you that. So that's encouraging, but I think what we're seeing from the advancement initiatives that we have in place, and more importantly, these internal assessments, is that we are seeing some significant improvements, but the data is young.
Thanks.
But, and so, to Mr. Walker's point, though, we have all these subgroups, so children are identified in all these different subgroups. So I don't want the climate to be, well, those are all new students. Because once a student comes into the Milton Public Schools, they're a Milton Public School student. So all children have to excel.
So for this school year, for FY15, our advancement budget supported 2 new positions. We hired a district-wide digital education administrator to support the integration of digital technology. So this is someone, Dr. Angela Burke, who has been into classrooms throughout the district. She's helping us identify needs for integrating technology, for ensuring that we are park ready. We have been able to purchase a number of digital devices, and she's helping us identify professional development needs of staff, helping us plan professional development, and again, identifying the tools that students will need to know and be able to do in order to successfully participate in park. So she is serving on a number of committees to support our teachers as well as our leadership team. We're very happy to have her on board. She was just instrumental in supporting efforts for additional devices that will be purchased through an MFE grant. We're very happy to report. That position is in place. We are in the process of hiring a data specialist to support data-driven instruction and to analyze student data and trends. So currently, members of our leadership team have been responsible for digging into all of the data. There is much data available through the Department of Education, but it is very time-consuming. There is, of course, the necessity for us to provide data to our teachers so that they know how to plan instruction for students. So but there is a lot of data to look at, and we think that this data specialist will not only help us in entering data, but in the analysis for all of our programs, the evaluation of our instructional practices, and our curriculum is ongoing. And the data specialist will also serve a role in our continual assessment of these programs. Under instructional support, our budget is supporting extended day and extended year learning opportunities, and Superintendent Gormley referred to the Saturday program at the Tucker School this year. There will be programs initiated at the other elementary schools. We have funding that's going to support our Summer Scholars program, the Pierce Academy, and the Calculus Project. Again, these are all programs that support our students who have been identified through MCAS data and also through common assessments that have been implemented in the district. The calculus project is a wonderful opportunity for students to participate in a pre-teaching model so that they can achieve at higher levels and participate in more challenging classes. We are this year supporting ongoing professional development in addressing the proficiency gap. So again, that's looking at assessment tools, it's looking at how to analyze data, looking at student work, forming teams to continually address the data analysis piece. Again, that is what informs our instruction. That is what helps us identify students who need those supports. It helps us identify those students who need enrichment opportunities and continued challenge. Writers' workshop materials were purchased this year for our elementary students, and we have implemented Reader's Workshop. I think you've heard us talk about that. And the Reader's Workshop is a balanced reading program, and while writing is a component of that, the Writer's Workshop is a specific structure that allows students to participate in the writing process, respond to their reading in a very systematic way. So we're very happy this year to have purchased those materials, and again, the professional development for implementing the Writer's Workshop model is ongoing.
Janet,
Yes.
could I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I didn't go back and look at last year's presentation on the advancement budget, but you mentioned that that you had funding for the extended day and summer workshops.
Mm-hmm.
Is that funding from the advancement budget? And how are those are faculty involved? I mean, who's teaching? This isn't self-taught.
Yes,
So-
yes, faculty supports students throughout the summer and before and after school programs and in our Saturday programs.
So the summer program, if I might, the summer program would identify children going from 8 to 9 who are at risk. We were with some audience today, and somebody said we call it the Bridge program. First, I should say this, for the Tucker children, because of the Title I money, they go to the summer program at no cost. So
Okay.
with the Title I money, and so everybody else pays in the summer. But what we've identified is that, and it's now,
Oh, so the funding is through tuition?
yes. But the
Okay,
one
and
program that we
Title I.
use, the advancement money for in the summer is students going from 8 to 9 who are at risk of failing. And it's a small number of, small, you have 300 students in a class, but approximately 20 students who perhaps wouldn't rise from the 8th to the 9th grade. And they're finding unbelievable success, bringing them up to the high school, familiarizing them with the high school, giving them the pre-skills to go into the high school. These students haven't experienced success at the middle school. And then our plan is to stay with these students. So again, we're giving them people have taken them on and giving them mentors.
So there was a salary and wage component to this level. It just wasn't a new hire.
No.
Okay, but there was, because I remember there was a significant salary and wage piece to that. Maybe that, I can
So-
go back and look at last year's, but it
And
might
so
be
for
helpful
the-
to be reminded of the
You know what?
of the
I
salary
should-
and wage pieces for these if they're not identified as a
I
new
can
position.
detail that for you, and it's very interesting that now, our third year into this, our second year into this, the PS model, from the presentations from the principals, tracing those students, they showed unbelievable progress on their MCAS and internal assessments. So now the Collycott is using the PS model. So for some schools, we sat down with the principals today, some schools it's before school, some schools it's after school. You know, one principal said to me today, I said, well, why isn't it all 40 children who are at risk? Well, 8 of them can't get to school at 7:30 in the morning, so I'm going to see if those teachers will come after school or on Saturdays. So again, it's tailored to each school. Is it before school? Is it after school support? Is it Saturday support? When this support's happening? And again, identifying the students that who are at risk. But I can detail what each school did and the salaries and how much time was given.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan?
Do you have numbers for the percentage of children in the various target groups that
Yes.
actually participate in these
Yes.
programs?
I can give that to you. So,
That'd be great. I wonder though, for tonight, do you have some sense of it? I mean, I presume these aren't mandatory.
excuse me?
I presume these participation in these various programs aren't mandatory.
No, that's a real, but you know what we've gotten better at in these 2 years with advancement? Today, one principal said, every home was called, multiple people called the home, the principal, the guidance counselor, the teacher. The principal at the Cunningham said, these children really need the extra help. The principal said to me today, he's going to do a session, but Mary, I'm not gonna get paid for it. So he's going to actually teach one of the sessions. He's going to take 5 of the children. He said they can't come up to school. I'll start at 7:30 in the morning. The other teachers who are teaching it. So we've gotten better at making contact with the families through the family liaison, through the people in the school, and really sitting down with families and explaining, this isn't because I want to see the 3 of you at 7:30. This is based on your MCAS scores, and we know that if you come for this extra help, it's going to make a difference.
If you could get the participation
I
rates,
would,
appreciate
I
it.
will.
Thank you.
Participation and numbers in the subgroups.
Yes.
I'll give you the picture of it all.
Yeah, great, thank you.
So looking at requests for the FY16 budget. For new positions, based on the success of a reading specialist model at the middle school, we are requesting $60,000 for a high school reading specialist. And this specialist would provide targeted assistance for students identified at risk. Again, a model implemented at the middle school has shown results in our MCAS scores, and we're hoping to see the same with our students who have been identified at the high school level. We're also looking to support students in grades 4 and 5. We have implemented our reading specialist model in grades 1 and 2, and then this past year have added a reading specialist for 3rd graders. So we have identified a need to support students in grades 4 and 5, and we have the word interim here because it is our hope, of course, that as we catch students in the early years that they may not need the level of support in the intermediate grades. However, we also recognize that when we look at the reading skills continuum, that some students develop at different rates, and some do not crack the code or break the code, as Superintendent Gormley referred to earlier, and some do not by the end of 3rd grade. Of course, as you know, that's our goal. But for right now, for those students who have not had the benefit of reading specialists in grades 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, we would like to have the benefit of an elementary reading specialist. Yes.
Some of the kids that struggle and by 3rd grade haven't met what you were hoping they would meet. Is that maybe because there's a special ed issue or reading disability of some sort, and that gets identified in grade 3?
It could be because of a disability. It could be a number of factors. It could be background of experience and lack of opportunities for reading foundation with vocabulary development. So for instructional support, we would like to continue to fund the calculus project. That would be continued targeted summer pre-teaching sessions and school year tutorials to support our at-risk students. This begins in grade 7. And we, of course, our goal is to have these students be on the honors math track through calculus. So we're looking for $25,000 to support the calculus project. We're proposing $20,000 for the Pierce Academy. Again, this is targeted instruction. It's an extended day learning opportunity for middle school students who are identified at risk. And again, this is according to our MCAS data classroom performance, and internal assessments. And additionally, for instructional support, we are looking to budget $10,000 for the high school bridge program, and again, another summer program that targets instruction for our rising ninth graders who have been identified as being at risk. Additional requests for instructional support, $20,000 to continue our elementary extended day, extended year programs, $20,000 to purchase assessment software for our middle school and high school. So we are looking at software programs that include Edwin Teaching and Learning. This is a program offered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. There's another program that our leadership team is looking at. It's known as Galileo, and this is ongoing assessment of student progress. It's monitoring students throughout the school year. These assessment tools allow teachers to create their own assessments. It allows them to use assessments that are already designed, that are standards-based. They align with expectations for PARC, and that is something that we have been hoping to use again in order to inform instruction. We're requesting $10,000 for a summer professional development institute on the proficiency gap. We have had some success in planning summer professional development for our teachers, and we've actually identified the time of year that we think is best to offer that in the summer with some success, so we'd like to continue to offer that. And finally, we have identified the need for a new writing program at the middle school, and $8,000 would cover texts, materials, and professional development needed to implement that program. Continuing, how will we measure progress and outcomes for closing the proficiency gaps? We are going to be taking a look at our district-wide formative assessments used in English, math, and science. These include, in K-2, what we call the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessments. In grades 3 to 5, we're using the Scholastic Reading Inventory. There have been what we call common unit assessments that have been developed across the district, across grade levels, so that we have some consistency in our assessment tools. We also have created student success plans for our children who've been identified at risk through our assessments. And these student success plans for the individual students include the data, include very specific interventions that would help those students achieve. And these are great, have turned out to be great tools for teachers, not only classroom teachers, but those teachers who are supporting the children in our extended day learning programs. So when those teachers working with students outside of the school day have a plan, a success plan for these students, it really helps them to get to know the children and plan their instruction accordingly. We will continue with our student data analysis meetings. Superintendent Gormley referred to some of those meetings today that we participated in. And again, we look at the individual students, we look at trends, we look at the overall progress of students, and really zero in on the individuals. Study Island is a program that we have been using for a number of years in the district, and it is a great assessment tool. It is a great enrichment tool. It provides practice for students and test-taking skills, as well as improving their skills overall in ELA and math. And we will also continue to look at our MCAS results, where we have MCAS here, but as we had noted, we are moving to PARC, and that will be one of our measures at the end of this school year. And for anticipated outcomes, we, again, are looking for all of our subgroups to meet the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education determined CPI targets, and that CPI is the name for a formula that is used that is very specific about the expectations each year for how we are closing the proficiency gap. Another anticipated outcome would be that individual students who participate in the programs will achieve a student growth percentile of 50 or higher. So not only does our MCAS or PARCC data look at student achievement, but we also look at student growth. And there is a window of growth that is an expectation for all students. It's another measure for how to support students if we're not seeing the growth that is expected. We have a considerable amount of data on our student growth percentiles, and that is another factor in addition to looking at student achievement data.
So briefly, the third initiative, advancing science and STEM. And again, reminding you that we identified these 3 advancement initiatives based on the student data. We had needs in these 3 areas. And so these research pages are really important at the beginning because, as you can see, the national research says you have to emphasize, I would bring your eye to, you have to emphasize the content and the quality of the curriculum. We're asking for curriculum material, the teacher's content knowledge, we're asking for professional development, and the use of instructional practices. That's what you do through the professional development. So I would ask you to look at these research pages that preface each of these areas. The next, as I said, identified need. You can see in grade 5, my analogy speaking to PTOs, all of a sudden you don't see, you see consistency in those numbers. So it shows that we had a need for the area of science. And it's interesting, MCAS is given grades 3 through 9 in English and math, and then grade 10 English and math, science 5, 8, and 9. And so you can see that we needed materials, we needed professional development, and we needed the time to make an impact so that we could improve this student data. The next page, I'll bring you back to 2014. We had one individual overseeing science, kindergarten through grade 12. And in our world, the phrase is, you can't expect what you don't inspect. And so having one person overseeing the continuum in language arts, you have an elementary, you have a math, and you have a middle and a high school person. Their skills are very separate and distinct. And so what we did the first year was to target part-time person at the high school, part-time person at the middle school, and then have somebody at the elementary school. This is having a huge impact in those classrooms, observing teachers, modeling lessons, working on the professional development. And so that was a request the first year. For those with elementary students, you might remember at the same time that we put the cap in on French immersion, we implemented a STEM program at grade 1. And again, a lot of work with the school committee and elementary school parents. This was an initiative not in the French immersion program, but in the English Pathways program. And so that implementation is currently in grade 3. And so each year, we've enhanced the science program, trained the teachers around STEM. Janet Sheehan stopped me at the Collycott window today in the first grade to show me the actual robots that the students go to starting in first and second grade to enhance their science program. At the first year, what we asked for in science, as I said, Dr. Spalding said, our students can excel in math and they can excel in language arts, but we needed the science materials. And historically, we'd buy one grade at a time. So this advancement budget enabled us to purchase the materials for grades 6 through 8 that hadn't been purchased, and it's really a 2-year rollout. And they're seeing unbelievable results of those, they're called FOSS kits. They researched and they went, again, we were fortunate enough to have the National Science Conference in Boston and a tremendous amount of professional development with the teachers implementing those science kits. So that's the second year, purchased in the FY14 year, these science kits. And then the professional development to implement, you understand at the middle school, at the elementary school, you're a teacher of language arts, math, and science. And at the middle school, their discipline is science. And so giving them the professional development to implement these new materials. And then indications after that first year at the middle school, the number of students with disabilities, you can see there was an improvement in a proficient and advanced and increase. At the elementary level at grade 5, students who scored warning in science was decreased by half. And again, to Mr. Sorgi's point, after that first year, there weren't new materials. So you look at different groups of children, but there was still an issue in their science scores. We're talking about one year of students. And at the high school, there was a significant decrease in the gaps between low-income and non-low-income African-American, Black, and white students and students with and without disabilities. So those were indicators after the first year. Now this current year we're in, what we did was targeted grades 3 through 5 who really didn't have an organized science curriculum and materials, new materials. So this has been a huge emphasis for our teachers in grades 3, 4, and 5 to have these materials, to give them the professional development. Again, I mentioned to you that the STEM initiative this current year is in grade 3, so that's purchasing the material, giving the teachers in the English program, the creative programming. We're now looking at 4 and 5, what we're going to do to finish that English 1 through 5 STEM initiative, and then the professional development for these new science materials. I'd say that the professional development has probably required the most detailed and demanding professional development is in the area of science. These science curricula are very, very technical, and it takes a tremendous amount of training with the teachers around these units. And then looking to 2015-16, next year, we've had Dr. Karen Spalding, and we've had discussions at the table around 2 electives that Dr. Spalding has put in around the STEM and the iSTEM initiatives at the middle school. And so a $48,000 .8 teacher would enable us, every student at the middle school takes science, but what this would enable is every middle school student to take a half-year elective in the area of the iSTEM or the STEM. And this would really drive the science instruction. Anyone would understand if you have more science and it's high-level science for all students. So right now it's only for students who excel in science. But if you want all students to excel, all students, so to have a second science class, an elective, this would enable us to do that. And the instructional support would be a $25,000 request for curriculum materials to go with that. $10,000 purchase for the expansion of the STEM into grade 4. The advancement budget has enabled us 1, 2, and 3. Next year it would go to 4. And the purchase of elementary science. So the continuum, we did the middle school, and this current year we're doing 3, 4, and 5. Next year we'll complete the continuum with the purchase of $35,000 for K-1, 2. And then we'll have materials in place, kindergarten through grade 8, text materials and supplies, and these FOSS kits. And then at the science at the high school, the science at the high school, for those years ago, the MFE had an initiative, and they created a biotech lab at the high school. And this is the last year of the existing money. So we've really used the MFE budget and the school budget to fund this biotech lab at the high school. They're looking to expand the offering. It's now electives. They're trying to expand it. And there's this parametric Technology Corporation. I sat with them. I can give you a list of the school districts that send their teachers there to be trained in the curriculum that should be put and used in this biotech lab. We would have never, in the taxpayer dollar, been able to create this option at Milton High School without the MFE. But again, we put that last $10,000 purchase in this year, and we've maintained the materials, but after you sit with the science people, you understand that it's a new world, and the digital equipment, again, we've used MFE money, school money, and this would bring that biotech lab and the digital equipment in all of the science classes up to par. And then a $20,000 summer PD around science and STEM. That would be for those teachers in grades 1, 2, and 3. And the last $10,000 at the Pierce School. As I said once, this rollout in science at the middle school is really over 2 years. I think there are 3 or 4 kits per grade level. The professional development is so demanding, you couldn't give training on these kits. But when we made the purchase, it's economical to make the purchase. But then the rollout of the kits is over 2 years, so finishing that professional development.
Just for people who don't know, including me, MFE money, please?
Great. So in Milton, 25 years ago, a small group created the Milton Foundation for Education. And so the Milton Foundation for Education has an event each year, and they choose a different discipline, athletics, English, the arts, math. This year it's going to be, I saw somebody write it down, STEAM. STEAM is going to be their initiative. Last year, it was digital technology. And so what they do is they target the funds. And so we would be coming to you and the taxpayer if it weren't for the MFE. We are ready for PARC because of the Milton Town budget, the capital budget, and the MFE. And quite frankly, you know, the MFE and other foundations we work with, they're very clear in articulating that they don't want to assume the taxpayer's responsibility. They want to enhance the programs, but the MFE has purchased devices that the guide for PARC is you have to have enough devices for the largest number. So at Pierce School, let's say it's 340 children at one of the grade levels, you have to have 340 devices. And so at the, and then they'll go to another grade, so this test might run over 4 or 5 days. And at each elementary school, you have to have the number of devices, this is determined by the Department of Education, for the largest number of children in a grade level. And so through those sources, we're able to really, some school districts going into PARC this year, some are going to go into PARC a year from now, but if we were able to have the number of devices, it was a unanimous decision on the leadership team and the teachers that why would we disadvantage our children and not give them the experience of taking the PARC exam this year and not waiting. But there have been a lot of sources that came together to make us ready. We're either going to be ready now or we're going to be ready 11 short months from now for the PARC exam. And through foundations, the Copelands, the MFE, the capital, and the taxpayer, and the PTOs, really, it's an unusual town to have those kind of outside forces in funding sources. Did that answer your question?
While we're on that subject, you obviously have given us information on revolving funds and supplemental grants, but I don't believe that gifts from the MFE or Copeland are listed in there. Can you provide those?
Yes.
The Copelands are in the revolving.
Copelands are in the revolving fund. Okay, thank you.
MFE funds things directly. So when they do small grants for teachers, they decide which grants get accepted and they fund them directly. On the park, some of the infrastructure, they said you can buy the following things with our money. We ordered on a purchase order, they pay for it. So yeah, the MFE money doesn't show in our revolving funds because they don't pass it through us. They're their own separate entity. But the Copelands, when they do it, goes through there's a Copeland gift revolving fund, in fact, in the revolving funds. We can see that going through.
Thank you. And yeah, I don't know if you can characterize the MFE contribution because, I mean, the thing I noticed in your description of the biotech lab funding in the past is that this was provided by the MFE and that they didn't want to, but also that they don't want to get into subsidizing things they think the town ought to pay for. But in fact, maybe this time they've started a program that is successful, but now they don't want to fund it, or the money for that initial funding has run out. So now they initiated a program, funded it, but now we have to continue funding it. So that's a little bit different.
Well, the biotech lab in particular, the equipment was bought 6, 7 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And in the world of biotech, 6, 7-year-old equipment is not the same equipment anymore. So it's usable, but it's outdated. A lot of it is more analog equipment than digital equipment and so forth. So Ed Mulvey, who was the science department head last year at the high school on an interim basis after our previous science head retired, identified parts of the lab that needed upgrading to make it up to more current standards. So it isn't a matter of, for instance, they weren't paying the salary of the biotech teacher or anything like
Okay.
that. They had bought the initial equipment, but it's to the point now where some of the initial equipment does need replacing and upgrading.
Thank you.
And then to the next slide, Glenn, the metrics that we'll use to evaluate the implementation of the STEM next year through grade 4. These upcoming spring MCAS will be important in grades 5, 8, and 10. And again, we have CPIs marks that we have to achieve. And then on the next page, we have given you a summary grid Glenn has created that the 3 initiatives, staff, technology, instructional materials, extended time, totaling $591,000. And Glenn and the Finance Subcommittee will talk to you how we're working on identifying what funds in the advancement budget could in fact be one-time funds. Glenn, do you want to go into?
Steve?
But just before you move on, I see how much of this is focused on metrics and outcomes. And you had earlier said that Milton has a lot of children coming in and going out. So does MCAS or anything else allow you to correct for that? Because a young child, we could invest a lot of money in them only to have them leave, and then whatever, productivity they have or success they have in their education career accrues to somebody else. And then if you get somebody new that other district should have been giving these kinds of services to but didn't, so it can throw off your numbers. So is there a correction for that, or is it all just lumped?
No. And it's really fascinating that when children move from district to district, their, MCAS goes with them. So let's say I get a 7th grader in, several 7th graders. Assistant Superintendent Sheehan said, you'll get a grade on your MCAS, but you also get a growth percentile. And so your MCAS travels with you from district to district. But no, when you become a Milton Public School student, you become a Milton Public School student.
So for our own benefit, is it possible to track the children that stay in the system throughout?
Well,
And
yes.
to make sure that,
Well, that's what Chairman Walker spoke. We can give you the data that we've begun, and once we get the data analyst, that's one of the initiatives. But we have some preliminary data on that we can give you.
that's not something I'm looking for. I just figure that over the long term, folks will be wondering what return they're getting for this kind of thing.
Right, when
It's
the
too
child is in the
too soon to
district,
know now.
K-12.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I noticed on the MCAS scores for science, you said they were grades 5, 8, and 9. 5 and 8 were, I think, roughly similar. And then the next level, all of a sudden, everybody got proficient. What happened? Is it really 8 to 9? Can you explain why
They're also different tests.
they are? Okay, calibrated differently?
5 and 8 are science tests.
Okay.
9, as we take it at the high school, is strictly a biology test. It's not a full-range science test. So
Okay.
it's a different test, is the short answer.
Right.
And in fact, even in the other scores, they're different tests. you'll find statewide on the math test, students do much better in 10th grade than they do in 8th. And part of it is allegedly because they know they have to graduate from high school, so they have to take it. But the fact of the matter is the 8th grade math test is slightly higher above 8th grade benchmarks than say, the 10th grade math test is. The 8th grade test is a hard test. It just is. It's harder than the 4th grade test. It's harder than the 10th grade test. It's just there's a standardized base, and that test happens to push a little beyond it, a little more than some of the others do. Why? I have no idea, but that's what it does. So it's, when you measure them, they are different. They're not always exactly apples to apples.
But Ted asked a great question, because at 5 and 8, it's a test of your 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. And so the 10th grade test is only biology.
9th grade.
9th grade, good pickup. Good. And so, well, we don't have enough time tonight, but it's very interesting about the science.
Oh, yeah, because the biology at 9th grade wouldn't have a heavy math component in it, so.
Just a quick question.
Jonathan and then Mike.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Will that turn into a power?
That's what I thought was.
Yeah, I was looking at, great programs and the $591,000 we need to raise to pay for them. And I wondered if anybody who ever went to Milton High became a billionaire. Or, seriously though, if there's I'm a proud graduate of the State University of New York at Albany, which was a publicly funded institution before. Now it gets 17% of its money from the state. And the rest of it's calling up the graduates and saying, would you kick in? Look at all the great things we're doing. And I know the Milton Foundation for Education exists, but it's not under your control. Has there ever been any consideration given to having a development officer? Or part-time, give
right
point
here,
2 of the
right
rest
here.
of this teacher here.
So, first of all, we're a public school. So, there are private schools that are our neighbors that are run on donations, and their headmasters have to go out to their graduates and do that. But we're a public school. The ownership of the public.
Just like my college was, right.
And so, we're a public K through 12. So you chose to go to college, people choose to go to college. We have to educate all of the children. We're the citizens, these children are the citizens of this town's responsibility. So we did, through the MFE, hire a grant writer. And not a lot of school districts have grant writers, and I found out why. So we had a grant writer for 2 years. We worked so hard. We actually sent the grant writer's grants to someone in New York City to see if he was as good as his reputation said he was and his references. And what it came out to be was that we're a little fish among a lot of public schools. And so public schools aren't given every grant that we possibly can apply for, we apply for. But he was going out for grants, and that's why school districts don't have grant writers. And so to your point, we've done some alumni work. But alumni give to their colleges. It's very creative, and I'd sit down with you and work on it, and we have an MFE member who's trying to do it. But people, human nature is people seem to give to their colleges and their graduate schools and not their elementary school experience. But it's a great idea.
I'm just in ignorance as an asking a question.
No, you
I didn't know
aren't.
if.
It's a great question. So what I want to say is we've
But you
tried it.
some things.
We've tried it. We spend an inordinate amount of time. You got me going on this. We spend an inordinate amount of time. We really try hard on fundraising. I would tell you, our athletic director trains other athletic directors how to fundraise. That's not something I'm proud of. I want him to train other athletic directors how to be better athletic director and health teacher and evaluate. So we do a lot of work on fundraising. We do, but it's not the nature of alumni funding. They feel that, graduates feel it's the public schools, it's the citizens' responsibility.
Well, Mary, I'm going to ask Tom and Jenny to give some money to the Milton Public Schools. I'm not a graduate of that, but they are.
Yeah, but you are a billionaire.
That's right, in Turkish money.
So since since one of the largest parts of the school committee budget is special education, and since we have a fair number of people on the warrant committee who haven't been through this before, we thought we'd give a brief primer on special education, as it is one of the more expensive parts of our program. So, you have a lot of reasons for special education. Special education is a large gamut of offerings. We're required to provide our students with special needs with the least restrictive environment in which they can learn. So the default and preferred option is what's called inclusion, where you bring them into the classroom and in regular ed classroom, and you give them support and you try to help them achieve in a regular ed classroom. But there are some times when certain supports aren't available. You might pull them out for some extra pull-out work, but they're in a regular ed classroom most of the time. Or they might be in what's called a co-taught classroom, where there's a number of special education students and a larger number of regular education students. Or they might be in a substantially separate program where they really aren't in a classroom except a little bit of the day, but they're primarily on their own most of the day with more intensive support. Or on the extreme, they could be in an out-of-district placement. They might not be with us at all. So there's a great continuum in special education. And the goal is to keep it down to that front end of the continuum, to keep the kids in district, to keep them in classroom with other children from the town. You know, morally and financially, it's the right thing to do. You want those kids with their other kids. You want them here. You don't want them bused for 45 minutes somewhere else if you can avoid it. So there are lots of reasons for costs of special education. We start with DESI regulations because they are legion as terms of what you have to do. Special education is mandated by the federal government, but many of the regulations are set by the state. You hear a lot these days about children on the autism spectrum. It's a lot more prevalent than it was when most of us were growing up, whether that's because there are more children there or just because it's better diagnosed now is irrelevant, because we have to deal with those children. And in fact, just the regulations alone on children on the autism spectrum are volumes, from not just in class, but their social emotional welfare, all sorts of things you have to deal with for those children. And they're not funded. You know, these are one of the many unfunded mandates that the state has. We've developed a lot of special education programs in district to service some of our students who formerly went out of district. When I started on the school committee 12 years ago, we had 90-ish students who were in out-of-district placements. Today we have 47. We are dealing with our students here. We're not sending them off. Transportation, though, is a major factor for those who are out of district. Transportation costs are high. We throw on this list homeless students in here. The McKinney-Vento Act says students who are members of families who are homeless can basically go to any school in any district that they can get to, but we have transportation costs associated with that, at least from the borders of our district in. So the transportation costs for special needs students, even those in district, you know, we may have them in our schools, but we have to send, you know, the small buses to pick them up. We spend more on special education transportation than we spend on regular education transportation. We spend more on the little buses than we spend on the big buses, right? Considerably more. Some of the other issues, a few years ago, there were stimulus funds from the federal government targeted for special education. They are gone. Circuit breaker is a state source of income that we'll talk a bit about in a minute, but it is dependent on the state budget. And so the extent to which we actually get money from it is somewhat unpredictable.
Of the homeless population that we service, are they all special needs?
No, It gets lumped in with special ed transportation, but they're not all special needs.
Okay, so this is the place to put that category.
For some reason, it tends to get lumped in with special education in most of the regulations and so forth. Homelessness is a separate issue. It really isn't truly special education necessarily.
Those numbers been getting worse or better over the last 5 years, the homeless?
They're increasing.
Increasing. Maybe you can tell us what they are.
I'd have to look at the number offhand.
You know, I'm going to give you the exact number tomorrow rather than tell you a number.
Yeah,
today.
no worries.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just curious.
As an example of our special education development, for instance, children on the autism spectrum, several years ago, we partnered with the New England Center for Children, which has the unfortunate acronym lately in the newspapers, NECC, because NECC is, for another reason, gets rather bad press right now, but this has nothing to do with compounding pharmacies. This particular program was out in Marlborough or Northborough, west of Framingham in any case, and it's where it was the nearest program for students on the spectrum. We contracted with them to open a classroom in town. We hired our own aides. We paid their people as advisors to come in and run the program. And it cost us $174,000 for last year, we opened a second program, which we call the Partners Program, which basically opened a second class for these children. But we run it. It's our staff, our teachers. We pay a small fee to NECC to help oversee it, but rather than hiring their people to teach the class, we're running it ourselves. So, you know, our Partners Program we mentioned here is, you know, 1 special ed teacher and 5 ABA paraprofessionals. ABA is what's the first A? Applied Behavioral Analysis. These are people who are very special training for children with these kinds of disorders. Whereas a class for 5 kids would have a special education teacher and 5 paraprofessionals in it. That seems like a lot of money and effort for 5 children. If you look at the cost of sending them out of district, as we say, at, you know, $350,000 to $400,000 a piece plus transportation, it's a deal. I mean, it really is a tremendous cost savings to do this ourselves. And plus, the kids are here in town. They're in the building with their other kids in their neighborhood and so forth. And they're not on a bus 45 minutes or an hour each way every day to go somewhere or other. So part of our development, and this is primarily because of the school building project. Prior to this, we really didn't have the room. Those of you who remember the days before the school building project remember horrible conditions for some of the special ed classrooms and converted bathrooms in the old Pierce School and just terrible lack of space. We could never have done this 15 years ago because we didn't have the space for it, let alone the ability to handle it. Now, with the new buildings, we have the space to implement these programs, and we do. And so that's part of the cost. But it's in many ways, it's a cost avoidance.
And so the town should be really proud of that. These families go and see these schools, and you have to have phenomenal programs within the district for families to choose to stay. So these programs have to be outstanding within the district, but to see a family that their child is able to go with the neighborhood children to a neighborhood school, it's an extraordinary story to go from 90-odd to 40-odd students out of district. It's really a good news story, and Glenn will detail all the lists of all the programs we'll be able to create K-12.
Out-of-district tuition costs for the students we do send out of district. Their rates are set by the state. They apply to be for what's called program reconstruction. Some of them are granted increases. Some of them stay fixed. But if you look at, you know, it's very hard to predict which ones are going to get increases in which years. And just an example of the Boston Higashi there, from $245 a day to $312 a day in 1 year. So a child who's out there 180 days a year, that's a huge hit all of a sudden. So, I mean, these, and their residential program from 488 to 545 a day. So, I mean, these are expensive programs that we're going out to some of these.
Can you describe what kind of student would go to the Higazi program versus stay within the district?
Janet, you want to?
Sure. So the students in the NEC program, or the Partners program that we recently developed, are students generally on the autism spectrum, and these are students who are able to again stay in their school community. They're able to respond to the instructional practices. They're able to respond to the programs provided by the ABAs, as we call them, and they meet with some success. Some have such significant learning disabilities that they're not able to respond even at that level. So they have behavioral issues. Some may be very involved with health issues that don't allow them to stay in our program. So it would be a level of significance beyond what we can provide in the school community.
And they do run from, there are levels of out-of-district placements. We have children who go to collaborative placements, some who go to particular schools. We have, in the extreme, you have students who are residents in what essentially are hospital schools, because they have significant physical disabilities as well as learning disabilities. So, I mean, it runs the gamut even in the out-of-district spectrum, from those who can't access the curriculum here to those who really need significant help to even just for their health benefits.
The children who do attend the programs in the district are able to meet with success. One of the great advantages is that they are actually able to be included for some of the activities in the general education classroom. So they're at least able to have some opportunities to socialize with children who are typically developing, and they're able to acquire some social skills. They have to go with an aide, and they need a lot of guidance and redirection, but they do meet with success in this setting. And then, of course, because of their needs, they do need what we'd call a parallel program, a parallel curriculum, so that they do spend much of their day in the sub-separate program.
So again, just a little chart on some out-of-district costs, running in the $3.5 to $4 million range annually. You can see here it looks like it's been fairly stagnant over the last few years, but if you look at the middle column, it's because the number of students have been sort of creeping down of late. Last year was 53, and this year 47, and we're still at 3.8 million with 47 students. That's not on the board, but this year's expectation is for the 47 students we have out there, we'll still be at $3.8 million for out-of-district tuitions.
And we meet on these special ed out-of-district placements and transportation every 2 weeks. A team of us at central office with special education, because at any time, a child could have to move into an out-of-district placement. And so we look at children who will be aging out, we look at children who are coming into the district, we look at children who are at the district who have been identified at risk, and sometimes we have a child who's at one private placement whose needs determined during the year that they have to move into a more restrictive private placement. So again, this is a priority meeting about every 2 or 3 weeks, watching this bottom line and the associated transportation costs with it.
And can you also speak to when a child with significant special ed needs moves into Milton from another town or city, how Milton has to share costs with that, for that particular student, and what the time frame is?
If they move in from another town in Massachusetts, and they move in after April 1st, the town that they were in on April 1st supports them for the next year. So if you move in here in June, it's too late for us to budget for that child. The community from which they move will still pay their bill for that first year while they're with us.
Within Massachusetts, if they're from Massachusetts?
Within Massachusetts. They move in from out of state, they're ours the minute we get them.
Okay.
All right, there's no such reciprocity there. So there is a little lag in the funding, within the state, because the state can mandate that if, a last-minute move-in. But they will be ours soon enough. I mean, that's only a minor delay in terms of someone's career. I mean, children who have special needs are ours until either they graduate or until their 22nd birthday. So we have a number of students who we refer to aging out, students who reach their 22nd birthday and have to go into different kinds of settings, but they're not our settings.
And of course, it would, if our students move away to a different state, then they're theirs.
Right.
Or if they move to a different town in Massachusetts, the April 1st deadline, obviously.
Right.
Glenn,
Yep.
we might want to add too that children with fewer, with less significant needs who move into the district, if they have IEPs, we're required, of course, to honor those IEPs and incorporate their goals into our instructional program. So that could have an impact on staffing if we have enough children who move into the district on IEPs.
IEPs are individualized
I'm sorry, yes.
educational plans.
Yes, I apologize.
We acronym you to death.
I know.
Referring to circuit breaker, which I did a minute ago, the state has a formula to help support those students whose costs are very large. If you have any student for whom you are spending in excess of the current base is about $41,000 and change, the law says that the state will pick up 75% of the amount over that threshold. That's the law. That's subject to funding. It's been more often not 75% than it has been 75%. It's been as low as 50% in the last few years. It's been running around 70% currently. And it's paid a year in arrears. So you're getting paid your circuit breaker money this year for what your allowable costs were last year. So when we detail the budget, the section on special ed refers to the out-of-district costs, and it says net of circuit breaker. You see the chart we have in there to see how much circuit breaker we're anticipating. And so the town picks up basically the net cost of the out-of-district placement. So circuit breaker, for instance, this past year is on the order of $1.3 million.
Glenn, how does that make its way back to the town?
It's paid quarterly back to the town. It goes into one of the revolving funds that you'll see in the budget book.
Doesn't go back to the schools, it goes back to the...
No, it goes back to the schools into one of our revolving funds. Several years ago, we had a home rule petition that allowed that. So in many towns, it just goes straight into the general fund.
So I'd say on the emails, circuit breaker and the percentage of circuit breaker is the most discussed item among superintendents, business managers, and sped directors. It's a volatile number.
And as I mentioned at the bottom, transportation costs are not included in the circuit breaker, and that's an issue as well, because transportation costs for out-of-district students can be enormous. But that's not, it doesn't figure into the cost for which there's reimbursement. That's, again, every year, for the last several years in the State House, there has been a bill filed and never passed to try to get that rolled in, because it's especially in Western Mass, where places are farther apart than they are right around Boston, transportation costs can be really exorbitant. And they're not cheap here, but they can be exorbitant there. So that's our quick primer on special ed.
So is there a body of people like you that petition the Senate or the House not to drop this circuit breaker level below 75%? And
Well,
How does this
if
work?
you look at, Mass Association of School Superintendents or Mass Association
Okay.
of School Committees, they're constantly pushing for those contingencies in the budget because
Be
it's,
fully funded.
to fully fund the circuit breaker is just enormous, one of the larger features of the budget. And it's very much dependent on, the governor and the legislature as to what the proposals are for it. It's, as I say, it's been as low as 50 and been as high as 75 in the last 10 years, but it's not predictable.
not predictable, but what do the tea leaves say for?
We're at 70 right now, but we're changing governors.
Yes, we are.
And this particular governor, when he was Secretary of A&F for a previous governor, was one who had it kind of low. So it's somewhat worrisome, but we'll see. I mean, that's all I can say is we'll see. It depends on the fiscal state of the state. And, decisions will be made over the next few months as to where that goes.
Thank you.
So we come to what we came here for tonight. Took us a while to get here, but here we are. So our request from fiscal 15 to fiscal 16 is for an increase of $1.7 million over the budget. And this slide just breaks out very quickly what those differences are. You've seen the advancement proposal, that's $591,000, so that's a good part of it. Last year, this year, in fiscal 15, $500,000 of our budget was identified as being paid with one-time funds. They were non-recurring expenditures. So we've backed that out because we said those were one-time expenditures. Negotiated wage agreements, is clearly the largest part of that. That's not just unionized, that's union and non-union wage agreements. We are under contract for next year, and I'll come to that in another slide. But that is the cost. Again, I'll come to it in another slide and detail it. The 2 new special educators, we will talk about that in a moment as well. That's not in the advancement budget. Those are 2 people we're going to talk about the need for right now. And a .5 FTE preschool coordinator. That's not the preschool teacher from the other slide. So this proposal actually has 2.5 positions in it that we feel we need regardless of advancement. Maintenance salaries to consolidated facilities. We have 2 maintenance workers. Their salaries and overtime amounted to $140,000. That is going to be transferred into the consolidated facilities budget. Bill Ritchie's budget will contain those 2 people. Those were the 2 people on our staff, as we say, who were maintenance people, and their salaries and overtime. We have sped tuition and bus increases of roughly $100,000. We have some facilities costs of roughly $100,000 and a variety of other costs of roughly $95,000, and I'll enumerate some of these things.
Will that money transfer to Bill Ritchie's group too, to handle that maintenance, or will that?
Which, the 100?
The 100,000.
No. That's, well, I'll come to that. That's heat and
Okay.
utilities.
Okay.
What we have done generally with consolidated facilities is while the salaries of the individuals tend to be in the consolidated facilities department, a lot of the maintenance costs for equipment and so forth tend to stay in departmental budgets. It's very easy for me to spend Bill's money, but if I'm spending my own money, I might reconsider some of the maintenance that we might need at the moment. So, I mean, that's been sort of the thought behind it, is a lot of the costs, the materials costs sit within the various different departments. So the 140 really is just 2 salaries and overtime. It's not.
We'll get there, but for instance, Bill might do the purchasing of some of those things on a town-wide basis. The school might be the largest client for those supplies, but he will coordinate the purchasing, but then the school will pay its tab.
We pay our share.
Anyway.
So, I mean, you've seen the advancement. We won't go through it again, you have the $591,000, and broken out a little differently. $198,000 is the 3.3 positions. $90,000 of the other money is actually the extended day and year salaries, the salaries of people who teach before school, after school, in the summer, and so forth. They're not new positions, but it is salary money because there are existing staff who do these things on per diem or whatever the other basis is. And $303,000 in non-salary spending. The negotiated wage agreements, this is the rollover of existing staff, including steps and lanes. Lanes are, for those of you who are not familiar with them, there are 5 lanes in the teacher's contract, generally reflecting increasing levels of education. So if someone earns a master's degree, they would move over a lane. If someone has 30 credits beyond a master's degree, they would move over a lane, or so forth. So there are basically education enhancements. You would want your teachers to be educated. So that's a fairly standard steps and lane chart that is in most communities. And the cost of living next year, third year of an agreement, is what's called a 1-1 split. They'll get 1% at the beginning of the year. They will get an additional 1% raise halfway through the year. At the end of the year, their salary will be 2% higher. The net effect to our budget is roughly 1.5% is the cost of the raises to us in fiscal 16. When you see in the backup salaries, that is that blended 1.5% cost. So technically speaking, not really the salary, because there's 2 salaries each year, but it's the cost that we will be paying for that particular person for next year. That will have a ramification actually in fiscal 17, because if you say someone's making $85,000 here, and in fiscal 17 you'll look and see what their fiscal 16 salary, won't say $85,000 because they were actually up 2% by the end of the year. But they're, the cost within fiscal 16 is the cost that I've put in your book.
And this is the last year of that contract.
This next year is the last year of our 3-year agreement with all of our employees. This does not include the advancement salaries. It does not include the sped and preschool positions that I alluded to a moment ago. It backs out the maintenance salaries. This is just a strictly rollover of everyone else. Right? And it's $1.3 million, or roughly 4.19% of that salary pool. Again, the denominator there, I had to back out the maintenance people and so forth who aren't there. So, but so it's roughly 1.5% is the cost of living, and roughly 2.5% is the cost of all the steps and lanes and so forth. The 2.5 new special education positions.
I'll
You
speak
want
to
to
this.
speak to that one?
In the world of special education that we talked about, the tutorial, and Janet Sheehan spoke about new children coming in, the research in special education proves that children with special needs will advance, and they're a subgroup in MCAS, and make more achievements if they're included in the regular class. And we could stay here all night talking about if you and I are taken out of the classroom, the special education teacher doesn't have an English background, a math background, a science background. So the movement is towards inclusion, to have all children in the classroom, but to have the special education teacher go into the classroom and co-teach with the regular classroom teacher. When Janet Sheehan and Glenn and I go into a classroom, if there's 2 teachers, often you don't know who the children with special needs are. A perfect co-teaching model is 2 teachers finishing one another's sentences, but again, the IEP requires that so much time is in the child's IEP. It might be 4 times 60 minutes a week. It might be 4 times 35 times a week, but it's determined in the IEP meeting, will that time be a pullout or will that time be pushed in? So the emphasis and the research proves that the more you can put the special education teachers in, include them in the classroom, have the children in the classroom, the scores, children with disabilities their MCAS scores and their achievement will increase. And so we're moving towards this inclusion, but we need an inclusion specialist, K through 8, to work with our special ed teachers and our regular ed teachers. We have people who have been on the Warrant Committee have followed this special education. Many of the children who we've kept in the district, we've created at the elementary school these co-taught classrooms. And so children who would have been out of district are in these classrooms that are at the Tucker and the Glover. They come from across the district, and there are 2 teachers in the classroom. That's a special ed classroom setting, and so those teachers work at that, but we're trying to move across the district, having more children in the regular classroom. So this would be an inclusion specialist, and as the leadership team said, you have to work with the regular ed teacher as much as you have to work with the sped teacher to make this work. And so we're asking for an inclusion specialist. This also would be to work with all the teachers, to provide the professional development, to model, to go in and observe, to work with the principal, to make sure that this inclusion is working. And at the high school, we have a model at the elementary and then a model at the middle school. At the high school, what they're moving towards is, rather than taking the child out, the child with disabilities out, and I'm the special ed teacher, I don't have a degree in science, I don't have a degree in English, I don't have a degree in math, I'm a special ed teacher. So what they're doing at the high school is they're moving the special ed teachers co-teaching with the English teacher, with the math teacher, with the science teacher, and meeting the individual plan. And the high school principal met with Janet Sheehan, Glenn, and myself the other day, and they're right at the brink of, they're providing services to all the teachers, but moving towards this model. They already know how many children are coming up from the 8th grade next year with the IEPs. One more additional SPED teacher at the high school. And then this preschool coordinator, we should call that a special, we'll call it, it really should be a special ed preschool coordinator. At the Collycott School, our preschool is housed, so when children turn 2.9 to 2 years, 9 months, and their doctors or their pediatricians or their families have identified that these children might have special needs, these children can be tested, and they're given individual special ed services beginning at age 3. And so we run a preschool, and again, it's the Milton Public Schools, the town of Milton's responsibility for these children who are identified at grade 3. So I would tell you, our former SPED director and John Phelan have both said to me, this is a growing population in Milton. I don't want to make anybody nervous, but you should look for more space because you have a growing special ed program. And so between this special ed program that's housed at the Collycott, the program at the Tucker, and we have a program that this Warrant Committee heard all about last year at the high school that's tuition-based. We're looking for a preschool coordinator with really an expertise to manage, which is what is in Milton, a growing population of preschool children. This used to be one class at Milton High School. They used a classroom at Milton High School maybe 10 short years ago before the construction, 12 short years ago, and now the preschool at the Collycott School involves 4 classrooms and an array of speech therapists, occupational therapists, and it is a huge program. So those are 3 needs in the world of special education that we've been watching and growing, and Janet Sheehan could keep you here explaining to you when you're the principal or the guidance counselor owning that preschool program, it's a very, very specialized skill, these children in the preschool. So these are 3- and 4-year-olds who are not yet in kindergarten, who go to school, some of them 5 days a week, some of them, whatever their IEP says, 4 or 3 days a week. And all the services that that preschool child might need. So that's a total of $150,000.
As he mentioned, the $140,000 is the 2 maintenance positions transferred to consolidated facilities. Special ed costs, we have a $27,000 increase in transportation this year. Our special ed transportation is on the order of $770,000 a year. It is a large number.
170,000?
770.
770.
770,000.
Out-of-district tuition increase, we are predicting about 75,000 based on where our children are. You'll see there's an asterisk there because $100,000 of special ed costs were listed as one-time spending last year. You'll see the special ed out-of-district actually goes down by $25,000. It's only going down because there's two competing factors here. One child aged out, and we had $100,000 in savings there, but we also have a $75,000 increase on the rest. So it's still pushed. The $100,000 was included in that $500,000 in one-time funds that I mentioned on the earlier slide.
Right.
So I have to include the 75 here.
I didn't get a chance to see all the pages, but is the other 400 out of the 500 equally detailed?
Most of it was things like professional development and so forth. In the chart, I do indicate where money was, where advancement money was, most of it's advancement money, where advancement money was in fiscal 15 and where it is in fiscal 16. But I can detail it if it's not sufficient. That's not a problem.
Great, thanks.
The facilities cost I mentioned, heat and utility increases and maintenance cost increases. Again, you'll see in the backup how we've done the computations for these. We have, for instance, for the utilities and the heat, over the last 10 years, we have charts of month by month, how many kilowatt hours we have of electricity, what the cost is, and so forth. So, you know, when we go back to the detail pages later on, you'll see that, you know, at the end of November, we typically have spent 39% of our heat. This year, we spent so much money, so we're anticipating that this will be our bill for this year, based on 3-year average of usage and so forth, and figuring an inflationary factor for next year. We came up with a number. So the computation is in the backup. When you go through it, you can take a look at it. You know, not assuming everyone read every page between last night and tonight, so I'm sure you'll have questions on how we did some of those things. But we can walk through those. And the same with the maintenance cost increases. Based on running year averages of how much we've been spending for maintenance. And frankly, our new buildings are getting a little older. I mean, the new buildings are now 10 years old, some of them. So maintenance costs are starting to come up a little bit from, you know, from the new days. So there are some increases in maintenance costs. And again, this is net of maintenance costs that we fund from our facilities rental account, for instance. We have spaces that people like to rent, the field house and the high school auditorium and so forth. And so in your backup, you'll see in the revolving funds how much money we take in rentals in a year and how much we spend out of it. And that also is money that's spent on maintenance. You know, maintenance and, for instance, if we have to hire extra custodians to cover an event, that custodian comes out of the, those overtime monies come out of the facilities rental account, for instance. But it's money that supplements the budget.
Glenn, could you quickly give me a heads up on the electricity bill? A lot of people are predicting huge increases in electrical costs. You're predicting 4%.
Bill Ritchie and I were talking about this. We locked in electric prices back in the beginning of November. So we're locked in for a year and a half.
And that includes all aspects of your electricity? I mean,
yeah, I would, probably a better question for Bill on the details, but we were lucky enough to get locked in before, when it was not the kind of cost that we were talking about now.
So this was a town-wide contract?
Yeah. We signed one for the town, one for the schools. We bid through Direct Energy, and we signed a contract with them to provide energy for the next year. We also have a contract with Wildcat Solar, which is a local group. They have the rights to develop a 5-megawatt solar farm on the roof of the old Stop and Shop warehouse in Reedville. The town uses 7 megawatts of electricity a year. We have signed a contract with them to buy their 5. So a large number of our electricity will conceivably come off solar, which is also at a better deal. The issue is they're still in the permitting phase. We don't know when that's going to open up. They were planning to have it open in the spring. I don't think they're going to make that deadline because their permitting was slowed down. We haven't figured that into our costs, and I know Bill hasn't either, because we can't count on it being there yet. But that's something as we go forward that could be a considerable savings. The town and the schools have signed 20-year lease agreements with that, with Wildcat Solar to basically buy all their energy. It's a great place for them. If you know the building, it's an enormous building, and they have the 2 main buildings of it, and it's right next to the train tracks, and it's right on the power grid. So for them, it's a no-brainer. They can connect into the power grid in 100 feet, and so it's a good situation. We spent a fair amount of time negotiating with them over the last year, trying to come up with an agreement. But as I say, it's not factored into here because we don't want to count on it. It's like, I'm not factoring any windmills into this either. We're going to wait and see.
Steve?
Glenn, since you mentioned it, the solar, do our school roofs have as many panels as they can take?
Yes.
Yes.
Every flat surface on every school building is covered with solar panels.
Any idea what that's saving us?
I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
And to that point, this finance subcommittee and Glenn spend an inordinate amount of time on all of this solar. And with this renting out, the Copeland Foundation, to your point about outside funding, when they enhanced the school building project after the project was done, and they created an auditorium that had 200 more seats in the field house, they have funded a part-time facilities rental person, because they knew that we're going to give you this space, but you should rent it. And so we're very fortunate. We don't have to pay the rental facilitator, but that is full-time work, and you always run the effort. When I see people in the auditorium renting it, I always think, am I using up the life of this auditorium for the town of Milton and Milton High School and the community? But again, we rent out every single space as much as we can and use that money. I think Bill Ritchie has said no town money has have to be used on the auditorium. It's all from the rental. The lights, any maintenance he's had to do since that auditorium was open. Again, but then I often say, am I wearing out the seats for the children for 25 years from now by the rentals? But that sometimes weekends in the spring, that auditorium is rented out every single weekend. Okay.
Phil?
I have a question about SPED. Your spreadsheet indicates that the increase from last year to this year is 466,000. Your presentation talks about 102 and then 154 new positions. What makes up the difference between the 466 and the 272?
What page in the SPED are you at?
Well, the first page of your spreadsheet, under the budget summary,
The next tab.
indicates a dollar change in SPED of $466,700.
Well, some of it's salaries. I mean, some of it's absorbed in that 1.3
Some of it's
million
what? Oh,
salaries. Because, I mean, there's a significant amount of salaries in the special education line. If you go back to the backup pages behind it,
Okay.
you'll see. And that's actually, as we said earlier, a volatile number, too.
About 200,000 of that 466 would be
You could
increased
break it
salary
out.
of existing staff.
It's on the next to last page, the last 2 pages of it. You can actually break it out by the DESI categories to see how much of it is salary for teachers, how much of it is salary, it is different things. But it's broken out behind.
The reason I ask that is you've given us a budget request, and you've indicated in your presentation that you're going to come back to us in January to talk about 2% cut budget and what the impact that million plus would be. But we don't have what we've asked for from everyone, which is a level service budget. Now, I think we're gonna have to compute that on our own unless you wanna give us some assistance in telling us what you think that level service budget is. In the past, we've identified that as carrying forward your existing staff with wage and salary increases, and perhaps adding in a sped cost, which is essentially a bill. You've got to spend that money in order to meet the federal and state standards. And the two of those combined, added to your budget from a year ago, could realistically be called your level service budget. If you've got that much money, you could provide the same service in the coming year as you have in the past year. I think it would be good for you to get back to us with your opinion on that, whether that's what you think it ought to be. Because I think otherwise we're gonna have to make an assumption on our own.
Well,
when we start to-
if you're talking contracts too, I mean, the special ed transportation is a contractual issue. I mean, the prices are set for what they are. I think you could make
Well,
the
that's why
argument.
I
on some other-
included the
yeah,
sped in it.
Yeah. Oh, you're including
I'm
the
including the sped plus
transportation.
contractual obligations.
Bill,
We'll take a look.
would you consider the advancement budget to be level service or not?
No, I mean, I don't consider it to be level service. I mean, it's an additional service, it's an enhancement to service, it's
One that was
probably very
provided
much
last
needed.
year.
I think that every department in town, based upon the look that we've had of the budget so far, are asking for things that are needed and that we ought to do. But it's hard to identify which of those things are level service and which aren't, so.
I can see the argument being made that that service was provided last year, so it would be level to provide it again.
What service was provided last
The
year?
advancement service, it's a program.
No, a different advancement service was provided last year.
So Phil, what would be your definition of level service?
The money to provide the same level of service that you had a year ago. That would mean you probably would need the same staff. You cut staff, you're not likely to be able to afford the same level of service. And you need to provide a certain level of sped based upon the law. That's essentially a bill that someone has handed you, and you have to adhere to. And so what you were able to afford last year, plus their increases in salary and plus the sped increases, would seem to be a good approximation for your level service. But maybe I'm missing something, and that's why I bring it up.
Well,
And to Lee Michael's question, so that would include the advancement services we provided last year, but not the
Yes.
services we're requesting this year.
Right.
Well, basically, we asked the other departments in town for three budgets. Pretty much what they wanted and felt they needed to provide the service they should to the town. And then another, and I don't care what you call it, and then another budget which was maintaining the staffing level that they had and maintaining contracts that they were engaged in, and then asking them for a level dollar on their other general expenses that were not part of any contract, okay? And then beyond, and then from that number, we asked them, okay, if we had to take 2% out of that. With the schools, it's difficult to compare because you give us a ton of information and we don't want to, we have the top number is fine, but if we want to find the middle and the bottom number on an equal footing with the other departments in town, we could use a little more information, and I can pursue that with Glenn probably.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the slide a couple ones ago here, to follow up on what Phil is saying, if you're saying that the advancement isn't part of level service, certainly you would probably be saying backing the 500,000 out would still be there because that was one-time money to begin with. The $1.3 million is there, you're saying, because it's wage agreements. I think we'll have a chat about the need for some of these special educators, especially the one at the high school, which I think is more mandated than anything else because of our enrollment. So, I mean, there's an argument to be made there. You're going to back out the maintenance salaries to consolidate facilities, because obviously they're not here anymore. So, I mean, you would definitely do that. Sped tuition and buses. So I think that the major question really is, like, a couple $100,000 on the bottom. You know, if you're saying that we level dollar your utilities, then yeah, I'd say you're taking the 100,000 out. We'll talk about the other costs in a minute. But a lot of this stuff, I think, probably does fall into the level service world. At least, you know,
Except that.
Well, it's what you need. It's what you need.
If it's the level of service we were providing last year, then I don't agree that $500,000 is out. I think it's in.
You mean
Well-
the second item?
Yes.
Yeah.
all right, just to finish up, there's only like,
I guess I missed that when you presented. The entire amount of that $500,000 is you're backing out the advancement budget? you
no,
got a
that's
year
the
ago?
one-time funds
No,
from
the
last year.
one-time
Remember,
funds.
last year, $500 million of our budget was funded with one-time funds.
What were those?
Well,
There was
100,000
was one
was
particular sped
was
placement.
that item they mentioned for the sped transportation. And that's why I was asking if the
70,000.
other 400,000 was detailed, but a lot of it was the initial investment for the advancement budget programs. So,
So
And
the
some of it was,
science curriculum, the science curriculum, you buy it one time.
Okay.
It's 10 to
Okay.
12 years. The professional development I started with that goes with it,
Yeah.
we're not going to have to do that PD ever again. We'll have teachers that can train new teachers. So we itemized everything. That would be a one-time cost.
And last year, there was also $60,000 in technology equipment for Park that was identified as a it wasn't in the advancement budget, it was in the regular budget, but was identified as a one-time fund. That's been backed out of our technology budget when you go to the detail on that.
I have a question. When you talked about the 2% less, do you go 2% under the same number dollar, or do you go 2% below the maintaining the same level of service?
we went 2% under maintaining the same level of service. Now, everybody in town has a different definition on what level service is.
And I heard it from you,
okay?
Ted. And I wrote it down.
By through to him.
And we've been using it in two different
Thank
ways
you.
tonight. But basically, we've been looking for what would it cost to bring your best product forward to serve the town? What would it cost to maintain what you've been doing? And then, okay, once we have that number, if that has to be trimmed due to the fiscal realities of available revenue, the initial estimate, which may or may not hold up, it was about 2%. So that's why we asked for the 2%, and that's why we are searching for your middle number to deduct 2% from.
And I think that we have to go back to that SPED one more time. For people who have been involved in the schools, when you had the out-of-district placements at 92, that was always a volatile number in out-of-district placements in transportation, but that's so controlled now, bringing it down to 40, a number within the 40s, 47, 45, that we're able to control for that. That's been a huge impact. That again, we've assumed those teachers and creating those classrooms, but if that was an out-of-district placement, that would be in this number that you're asking for, and it would be a volatile number.
No, I think bringing all those services in town has really helped stabilize that for you and for the town.
School budget.
And yeah, no, otherwise that would be blowing the budget totally right there.
Just to finish off that last number on the chart, the 95,000, I've broken it down here by the 7 major categories. Some are up, some are down. The backup for this is all in the book, rather than in the PowerPoint. The book is broken out by the 7 DESI categories: policy and administration, instructional leadership, instruction, instructional services, special ed, technology, and facilities. In there, we've broken it down, again, item by item within the subcategories that are on the long spreadsheet that you have of the budget, to try to identify the various different changes in there. We've given you all of our staff to see how the salaries roll up, to see where we got the salary numbers. And we tried to explain the non-salary numbers as best we can, the justification for where we got them and what we're using for them. And these are, the last bit is more or less little changes in here. The one that's up there, technology costs, we're filling in some pieces that we're missing, that helping us get park ready and so forth, but also equalizing some equipment across the schools where, there are 3 classrooms here that are missing a smart board, or there's, it's filling in some things, and there is an itemized list of that in the technology section, so you can go back and see what that is. So we've tried to break it out and make it as evident as possible what kind of numbers we're using. The one caveat I always say about a school budget is they're volatile between, when you look at our special education assistants, our aides, that number changed yesterday. It will probably change again tomorrow or, within 2 weeks. As students need different things, as individual ed plans are rewritten, and they're rewritten every day during the year because they're once a year and they're staggered across the year, those needs change. So, in fact, when I did an estimate of what the special ed aides were in September, it turns out that I needed 3 more aides or 4 more aides when I ran the estimate 2 weeks ago, because we had to hire them in the interim. So some of these are fluid, and we will be making adjustments because we have to make adjustments. I can't tell you I won't need another teacher this year. We might. We have unpredictable costs like for substitute teachers. We've, worked substitute teachers on a 3-year average of them. But some of you who have children of the middle school age might remember 2 years ago where I think we had 21 pregnancies, and well, that's a lot of substitute teachers. So it happens, and sometimes you actually hire a teacher to cover this one while she's out, and then to jump over to this one who's going out 3 days later, and and hire a teacher for the year instead of substitutes for the year, and so it's a very fluid number. So all of these numbers are a snapshot in time, especially on the salary, on the staffing. And they will move, I promise, because they always do. So, I mean, they are our best estimate of where we are and what we need and what we're working on. But if you come back to me next year and say, you said you needed, 67 special education aides, and all of a sudden I see you have 72 in there, I'll say, yeah, I suppose there are. It could happen, and almost certainly will, in one form, one way or another. So that's my caveat.
So, sorry, go ahead,
Sorry,
Betty.
can I ask about FTEs, how many staff in the system? I did look a lot at your, I like the enrollment projections, that was really interesting to watch, and it seems like the enrollment's pretty strong. But I know part of it may be program-based, but have the FTEs stayed about the same? Have they changed? Because, every year you see in the paper the group photo of the new hires, but I'm wondering always the time is how many folks left, how many people retired, and how many of these are new folks that are replacing people who left, or new hires because of expanding population? I know that's a huge question, but.
Yeah, it does move around, especially in the aid world. I mean, when you add up all the FTEs and you say there are so many FTEs in the schools, that really is a rather bogus number, because an FTE for a teacher is different from an FTE for an aide, is different from an FTE for a custodian, and that you really have to break them down by categories. They don't, my estimation is our number of teachers hasn't varied greatly. Our special education teachers have gone up, I'll say that. Our regular education teachers have remained reasonably constant, although this year we had an influx of kindergartners and first graders. We added 2 kindergartens and a first grade at the beginning of this year for enrollment. So, it doesn't vary wildly in the regular ed world. The special ed world it generally keeps going up. I think you'll find the support staff has been reasonably constant, even though we added a data specialist and a the parent outreach person this year. Our support staff has been thin for a number of years because we've always prioritized people in the classroom. And so those are positions that have been cut over the years. And it is starting to stress a little bit with the level of support staff. You know, who's minding the building when the elementary school secretary is out to lunch? It's a good question. There isn't a spare secretary in the building to mind it. Someone has to be doing that, you know, so, and you don't leave the office unattended with our, you know, secure entry buildings and so forth. You have to have someone there. I mean, so and custodians, you go back to 10 or 15 years, our custodial staff is well down from what it used to be. We managed that somewhat because of the new schools, but the new schools are a lot bigger. And the custodial staff is really stretched to clean the square footage that they have with the folks they have. But it's hard to assign just a strict number to it and say, oh yeah, there are 7 more bodies than there were last year. But without saying where those bodies are, it's a fairly meaningless statistic.
So I want to say just a couple things. You mentioned this budget is a snapshot in time, and certainly when we made the 2% cut estimate, that was a snapshot in time. And one of the reasons it may be wrong is because this budget came in substantially less than I had predicted. And
we'll add to it if you like.
Thank you. So that was great. I mean, I haven't looked at each page, but it looks like a budget of great thought and restraint. And, you know, in general, you know, and I think probably, you know, Milton schools, you know, really punch above their weight, along with, you know, the help they get with the MFE and the Copeland Foundation and some of the school committee's smart strategies on developing our own capacity for SPED and other things like that. But all that being said, we still have fiscal realities to deal with, and we'll see where they take us. As Leroy wisely told me last year, hey, it's a process. We'll get there. And part of that process will be, I'm sure, a meeting on the subcommittee level with Paul, and I would encourage anybody on the warrant committee to send their questions for the schools through Paul, and I'm sure we'll see each other in January. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add or any other questions for tonight, but we will certainly follow up the subcommittee level, and then I imagine once more all together, if that's amenable, and we'll work out the details.
And we'll funnel these questions to Paul, and any question that you have, you just funnel to us.
At the end of this, I did mention, and there's like 2 more slides of the PowerPoint that you have in your folders.
Oh, bring them on.
No,
Bring them on.
they were just summaries. There's
Okay.
a picture of what the budget looks like. And that's the quick summary page of the ask for 1.7. But what I will say is, on this one, this is a one we had last year. I'm still working on exactly what the number of one-time funds could be realistically in this budget. We've certainly identified $283,000 in the advancement budget as one time, and I've identified a few other things as one time, but I'm still working on that. We just you know, got this together in this form 3 days ago, so that's a piece I'm not quite there yet on. So,
Well, we have things we're working on too.
yeah,
You know, so,
we'll get them to you.
and
It's 47 this year, I think they said.
talk about. Oh, sorry, Steve.
This is more a comment overall than about
Please.
the school department, and it's some points I've made before, but the school department budget,
Guys, can we listen to, guys, you're on mic, you're on TV. Can we listen to
the
Steve,
school
please?
department budget is made up of 5 sub-budgets, 1 to each school, and
6.
6.
sorry. But the school committee and their budgeting process has narrowed down all of the requests from those 6 into 1. Not everybody got what they wanted. So in the same way, when we're dealing with the selectmen's budgets and the budgets that are under their control, something akin to this where they come in to us with a presentation where they've already had their discussions with the department heads about what can and cannot be done is really something that I would like to see happen.
So noted. We will do that. Or we think we will.
So, Steve, what, I wasn't quite clear on what you were asking for.
You're a good model.
I'm comparing the model that's used here to the model that we get for the other departments, where each of the individual departments that's seated beneath the selectmen just come in and say, we'd like everything on this list. And the selectmen may or may not have vetted all of that, A, and B, they can give to us some more direction on, we think that this department deserves more additional assistance than another one does in any given year, rather than this unelected board just making those arbitrary decisions. The policy people who are elected to do so would do so and bring us a budget accordingly, or a budget recommendation.
Well, unless we can offer the school more money than they asked for, their preferences, the preferences of the school committee, I think, will manifest themselves in the prioritized lists of cuts that they will have to give us in order to, or tell us about in order to meet a target budget number. So I think, does that somewhat satisfy what you're looking for?
I'm not looking for anything more on the school
Right.
budget. I'm looking for a similar model to come in from the select departments, where there's been a funneling process that brings us a narrow group of vetted proposals for additional services or for cuts or whatever there's going to be, where they've had their say.
Well, we will work on that. And we can probably get that done without Glenn showing them how, but we'll, I take your point, Steve. It's nice to have that prioritized list of cuts if they are necessary. Sure. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and look forward to seeing you again, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
And I will take a motion.
Thank you all.
They sent me in leadership group with the list
Oh,
of
we adjourned, but thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.